Hey, welcome back to part 2 of chapter 0. We're going to start today with multiplying and dividing rational numbers, but more importantly, multiplying and dividing fractions. When we get to number 1, look at number 1. We are multiplying two fractions. When we multiply fractions, we get to multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So 1 times 1 is 1, and 2 times 6 is 12. We have to ask ourselves, can that be simplified? 1/12 cannot be simplified, so that is your final answer. To 2. Now we have a negative times a positive. Remember back to yesterday, a negative number times a positive number is always going to be negative. Again, we multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So here we have 2 on top over 3 times 6 is 18. Now, can this be simplified? Can we take a number out of the top and the bottom? Well, we have a 2 on top, 18 on the bottom. 18 is divisible by 2, so we can divide out a 2 on top and a 2 on the bottom. So now we are down to 1/9, and it is negative from before. So our final answer is negative 1/9. Now, when we divide fractions, we have to flip the second fraction. Let me say that again. When we divide fractions, you have to flip and multiply that second fraction. So, let's go ahead and try that. We have 1/2. We're going to flip that second fraction upside down, so we're taking the reciprocal of 1/6, and then we multiply. When we multiply, we go straight across the top and the bottom, so we have 6 over 2. Can 6 over 2 be simplified? Yes, it can. 6 over 2 is simplified to 3. Same thing with number 4. We are dividing fractions. We want to flip the second fraction and multiply. And here we have a negative 1/3. Remember, when we have a negative multiplied by a positive, it is going to be negative. When we multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So it's going to be a negative 6 over 6. And 6 over 6 turns into, well, what is 6 divided by 6? It is a negative 1. Now, when we get into multiplying mixed numbers, just like this 1 and 1/2, the first thing we have to do is change this to an improper fraction. Remember circle multiplying from yesterday? Multiply the bottom, then add the 1 on top. So 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 is 3, so it's going to be 3 on top. Over 2 on the bottom, bring down our 3/5. And we are still multiplying. When you multiply, again, straight across the top and straight across the bottom to get 9/10. Number 6, a little bit more tricky. Again, the first thing we have to do, even though we're dividing, we have to circle multiply to get this to be a improper fraction. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5/2. Careful, we are still dividing here, and we still have a negative 3/4. Now remember, when we divide, we have to flip the second fraction. We have to flip the second fraction and multiply. I'm going to change colors because we are flipping the second fraction and we are also multiplying. The first fraction will always stay the same. Now, I'm going to do a little multiplication a little bit differently here. I look at this and I notice that kitty corner from each other, that this 2 goes into the 4 twice. So I'm going to simplify right away instead of waiting until the very end to simplify. And 3 and 5, are there any common factors? No, so I have to leave it like that. So we still multiply across after I take out our like terms. So we have negative 3 times 1 is still negative 3. Then we have 2 times 5, and that is 10. So our final answer is negative 3/10. Now, when we express a percent as a fraction in simplest form, we have to put this percent always over 100. percents always go over 100. So we have 25%, and we're going to put 25 over 100, and now we just simplify this fraction. Well, I know that 5's always go into 0, so I'm going to take out a 5. I'm going to divide out a 5 on top and divide out a 5 on the bottom to get 5 over 20. Well, can I do it again? Can I take a 5 out of the 20? Absolutely. So I take a 5 out of the top to get 1. Take a 5 out of the 20 to get 4. So your final answer is 1/4. Even if there's more than 2 numbers in the percent, you still have to put it over 100. So I'm going to put 110 over 100. I see that both of these numbers end in a 0, so I'm going to cancel out that 0, or to be mathematically correct, I divided out both top and bottom by 10 to come up with 11 tenths. Now, the percent proportion. This is your percent proportion, is a very important proportion for you. Notice how we have part over a whole, and your percent, your always percent, will always be over 100. So if you see the percent sign, that number goes here. So let's take a look at number 9. 40%. I see 40% right away. I'm just going to plug it in that percent immediately. So I'm going to put 40 over 100 and put it equal. So there's 1/2 of my proportion. So 40% of 30 is what number? We have to figure out where this 30 goes. Well, I know that it's saying 40% of 30 is what number? So is 30 going to be the part of the whole, or the whole? Since it says 40% of 30, 30 is going to be the biggest part, right? So since it's the biggest part, it has to be the whole number, so it's going to go on the bottom. I do not know what the part is, so I'm just going to leave that A. Now the fun part here is that we get to cross multiply, and so when we cross multiply, I take 30 times 40, and I'm going to write it over here, 30 times 40, and that's going to be equal to 100 times A. Now we keep going with this. 30 times 40 is 1,200, and that's going to give us equals to A. And now we have to solve for A. How do we solve for A? We have to divide by 100. And so now A is 12. And so now we know that our part is 12. And when I ask you to show your work, this is exactly how I want you to show your work for these percent proportions. Number 10. Now we have 25% of what number is 18? Well, I see 25% right away, so I'm going to plug that immediately in for my P in my proportion. So I put equals 25 over 100. Now it's saying 25% of what number? If we go up back to 9, where it said 40% of 30, notice where we put 30. 30 was a whole. Well, now it's saying 25% of what number? Well, what number? We don't know what number is that, so I'm going to put it in the same spot we put 30 in our proportion. So I'm going to put it on the bottom. And then what number is 18? So I'm going to put 18 on top, and now do exactly the same thing that we did in problem number 9. So I cross multiply here to get 25x. That's going to equal, and I'm not going to show the multiplication, I'm just going to draw the arrow. That is equal to 1,800. And now how do we solve this equation? We have to divide by 25 to both sides. And so now x is 72 for your final answer. If you wanted to double check, you could put 72 in for what number, and now 25% of 72. Thinking word problems, what does of mean? Of means multiplication, so we have 0.25, which is 25%, times 72, and will that give us 18? You'll have to check and find out to see if we did it right. Moving on, next we move to perimeter. The perimeter is the distance around a figure. We are asked, what is the distance around this rectangle? Well, these tick marks give us a hint. If those tick marks are the same on the other side or any other side of the figure, we know that that distance is the same. So since we have the same tick marks here and there, I know that this is 9 meters. This is 3 meters over here. We have the same tick mark there. So I know that is 3 meters. Now perimeter is distance all the way around, so we just add up all the sides. We have 9 plus 3 plus 9 plus 3, which gives me a grand total of 24. Don't forget our units. What's our units? We are looking at meters. So it's 24 meters. Next is circumference. Circumference is the distance around a circle. Circumference is the same thing as perimeter, but it's the distance around the circle. Not just any figure, it's circle. Circumference is measured in 2 pi r, or 2 pi times the radius. Please remember that pi is 3.14. You might know pi, or you might know 3.14 better than you know pi. So let's try a problem. Find the circumference of this circle. Well, we have our formula, which is 2 pi r, so I'm going to use that. 2 is right from the formula. Pi, I'm going to plug in right away, which is 3.14. And now what's our radius? Our radius is from the middle part of the circle out to a side. So we have our radius is given to us right there. And so it's 3. And so now you can take out your handy dandy calculator, punch that right in, and you'll figure out that it's 18.84. And we can't forget our units, centimeters. Remember, we're talking distance around the circle, so it's only in centimeters. Next, let's talk about area of the circle. Area of the circle is pi times radius squared. Again, remember that pi is 3.14. Now we look at our circle. It says d equals 10 meters. Well, d is the diameter. We only want half of that. Well, what is half of 10? 5. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So now we found our radius. Our radius is 5. So now we're going to plug that into our formula. So we have 3.14 times 5 squared. And now if we punch that into our calculator, we have to be very careful though for some calculators, and so I'm going to write it like this, that we go 5 squared first. 5 squared will give us 25 times 3.14 is 78.5 meters. But now we're talking area. So when we are talking area, instead of just meters, we are talking square meters because we're talking about a surface. We have to include the 2 dimensions. And the last problem, the volume of a rectangular prism. The volume is given to us right here. How do we find our volume? It's length times width times height. So we look at this rectangular prism. The length would be down here. The width is how wide it is, and the height is how tall it is. So let's try a problem. What is the volume of this prism? We see that we have a length of 5 inches. We have a width of 2. And we have a height of 3. So I'm going to multiply all my numbers together, or all those correct numbers together, to come up with 30 inches. But now we have to be careful again, because it's not a distance around, so it's not just inches, it's not a flat surface, it's not just area, but it's volume, and volume is measured in cubic units, so it's 30 inches cubed, or a 3. And that concludes the second part of Chapter 0. Thanks for tuning in.